Recently, President Goodluck Jonathan lamented the near collapse of Nigeria's university education sector.
Now, the president regretted that Nigeria, which used to be undiscriminate against products of some foreign universities because of the questionable quality of education from those systems, has fallen to the same rejected level.
As much as the federal government is using increased budgetary allocation to the education sector and other intervention mechanism to improve university education in Nigeria, the government says the state governors are not helping matters at all.
Now, at an event in Abuja, President Goodluck Jonathan, represented by the Executive Secretary of the National Universities Commission, Professor Julius Okogie, put the cause of the rot in Nigeria's university education at the doorstep of state governors.
The president also said state governors have turned the establishment of universities into a political weapon. The governor established universities and polytechnics to now applause and political mileage, but failed to fund the so-called institutions.
The president also accused the state governors of playing politics with the seating of the universities, and in some cases, governors actually relocate existing universities to the hometowns without considering the availability of structures to run education at that level or the conducive environment for healthy learning.
The president was not done yet. He accused the governors of interfering with the appointment of vice-chancellors, rectors, or even deans, making a nonsense of the expected autonomy of the schools. They also interfere in the admission process, thereby bloating admission beyond the available facilities.
But is the system helpless, or should the system be helpless in the face of such a situation that comprises the quality of the products of the country's university system? This is the issue in focus this Tuesday, and joining us in the studio this morning to discuss this very topical issue, we have Dr. Eke Agbai, Vice President, Center for Policy and Foreign Engagement, USA. Thank you for joining us. We also have Musa Hassan Gusau, Director, Literacy and Development, National Commission for Mass Education, and NEC. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you.
Also joining us this morning is Uzo Azubike, is an Honorable Member of the House of Representatives. Thank you, Honorable, for joining us this morning.
All right, I'll start with you, Honorable, because you represent the House of Rep. Now, education is on the concurrent legislature. Of course, currently Nigeria's constitution, and this gives the states right to choose, universities, authority to establish universities and run it as they deem fit. Do you think this is a backward step, or do you think it's going to make, if you listen to that intro, do you think it makes good of what is about to start?
First, I did not have I'm Uzo, as we can member representing Abanot and Abasa Federal Constituency of Abia State, Chairman, House Committee on Public Petitions, and member of the Education Committee of the House of Representatives. I did not listen to the statements credited to the President to know the circumstances under which, and the context under which they were made. Otherwise, if the President actually said all that, I think they are very hard statements, to be made, and they will be a little bit far from the reality of the true location of blames in the education sector. The Constitution, as you rightly said, placed education rightly on the concurrent list, enabling the federal government and the state governments to share powers and responsibility. And that shows rightly too how critically important the makers of our Constitution considered education. So the listing of education on the concurrent legislative list of Nigeria is not just necessary, it's imperative. And if you look at the list of matters which we have proposed to Nigerians for amendment, you see that that item is not touched, because it is necessary that education is on the concurrent list. Now, having said that, as a Nigerian and as a member of the House of Representatives and as a member of the Committee on Education, from point of knowledge and facts, I do not think if the President made all those sweeping statements that it is fair to locate the blames on the near collapse of our education sector on state governors, as if governors run Nigeria single-handedly. What is happening in the education sector today is a reflection of the, honestly, true state of affairs in Nigeria. Education is the responsibility of everybody. The local government, the state government, the federal government, and individuals. It is the responsibility of both the operators and the supervisors of the educational sector, including the Ministry of Education at all levels of government, a body like the NUEC itself, because I also had some statements being credited to Professor Koje, the Executive Secretary of NUEC, also blaming the governors. I think it's not fair. Why I think it's not fair is because now if you talk about the university system, if that is our focus, you now know that we have 3 levels of universities. We have the federal universities, we have the state universities, and we have the private universities. And all of them are regulated. They are owned by these different sets of people, and they are regulated all by the NUEC.
All right.
And if you look at education from the point of funding, which is what they're always talking about, from the point of funding, the federal government has its responsibilities. And we look at budget year by year. You look at this year's budget, for instance, we are still far from the target.
Yes, indeed. The target is supposed to be 26%.
Yes, we are still far from it. Even though to me that target is unrealistic in Nigeria today.
Okay, Honorable, that's another topic for another day. Let me bring Dr. Agbai in at this point. Now, the Honorable has said it isn't fair to put the blame of the rot in the education system at the footstep of the governors. Definitely, everyone agrees that everyone has a role to play, you know, when it comes to this mess that the Nigerian education system has found itself. Nonetheless, we're focusing on the part that governors seem to play, you know, in allowing some of this rot to happen, because universities are on the state governments and some on the federal government. So let's look at state universities and the role that governors are playing. You know, like you heard in our intro, we have situations where a governor imposes a vice chancellor, you know, or a rector or a dean of a department onto the university, and whether everyone else likes it or not, that is what he wants, and that is what it has to be. What does this do to the education system?
Well, I'm glad this is being discussed, because education as a strategic investment in human capital development is the only way a nation can develop. While I agree in total that the blame may not necessarily be domiciled on one person, but let's zero in on the aspect on that discussion. At the state levels, where the governors are to be in control, all aspects of educational system at that level, to some extent and to a large extent, is influenced by the governors. And when you talk about imposition, it means that those with sound intellectual qualifications, those who are trained educators, who understands the imperativeness of education, are not put in place. So when you talk about interference, it's not only in education, in all aspects. And that explains the total collapse of what is going on. So for you to have a well-rounded system, there must be the freedom to allow the process to take its due course. The freedom to make sure that those who are at the helm of affairs are not influenced. They will have, you see, UNESCO International Commission came up with 4 pillars of education. And each of those pillars are not met. Why are they not met? Because the rationality has been adversely influenced by the governments. And to some extent, if you have a governor who has now put in a rector, a vice chancellor, or a principal, as the case may be, who is not qualified. The 4 pillars of learning to know, which is where the absorptive capacity of the adolescent is shaped. Learning to do, which is the skill acquisition that Obasanjo made it imperative back in 1978, has failed. The act of living together, learning to live together, which is the 3rd pillar, has failed. Then learning to do, which is a continuous process until that person dies. Because education is a continuous process, has failed. So, the problem is, when you talk about influence, you have the influence at the local government by the governor. You have the influence at the state legislature by the governor. You have the influence where the governor decides who is the senator, who is the minister, if he's going to use caretaker committee or elections. And if you do that, so those people then may not necessarily advance the course of education in the, at the local government level.
Okay, let me come in here because...
So when we talk about influence,
yes,
you see, to only speak of education, I think there needs to be a holistic discussion on how these influences is undermining the overall democratic development of Nigerian nation state, because it is the core of what is going on. If you only isolate education, education is an integral part of our national development, but there's need for us to discuss this in the context of how it is hampering the development of this nation.
All right,
state.
the Honorable here said that the statements made by the President were sweeping statements are rather heavy. Now, you've talked about the holistic approach.
Yes.
And I want to come from a place of misplaced priorities.
Yes.
And, you know, putting power on the governors that will not help the state. Why do I say this? You come to the state, the governor is the chairman of the party, of course.
Yes.
He decides who the local government chairman is, he decides who the dean is, decides who the speaker is. Now we look at what's happening generally in some of the states. Let's look at Benue State, what's happening currently in the State House of Assembly. Let's look at what's happening in Kogi State. And these are states where the governors are very, very viable and present. Now you bring education as well. Where do we draw the line for the governors? Where can we say, okay, this is the time, this is the terrain where you just put people there to work the work while you sit back and watch the revenues, you know, multiply? Because if you look at what's going on, jack of all trades, master of none. So how do we begin to...
I'm really glad you mentioned the 2 states in question, Benue and then Kogi State. Let's look at Kogi, for example. The investment that should go into education, because when we talk about decay, the honorable member spoke about funding. Instead of the money going in there And instead of cooperation among the 3 tiers of government, we should be independent anyway, because it's the height of arrogance for any arm of government to decide who should be there. The money that should have gone into educational investment, upon verification and confirmation, we hear that instead of that, the money is being used to remove a speaker, to influence the removal of a speaker who is number 3 citizen, and by implication, 1/3 of the nation, of the state. And then an individual wants to decide who should be the speaker. The speaker is not the commissioner, the speaker is not the deputy governor. So that money that should have gone into education has been misplaced. That is the misplacement for priority, for example.
Right.
So what we are talking about is, and everybody seeks refuge in silence, because evil men will always triumph when men of goodwill seek silence in tyranny. You cannot discuss education alone, because the money that should have gone into education is now being misappropriated for things that will not benefit the citizens. And yet we have elders keeping quiet. So when you talk of education, when a political party runs apart their manifesto, they probably say, we are going to do this for education. And to the extent that it's not being done, the party should be able to have intervened. No, this money should go into education. Why are you misappropriating for the impeachment
Dr.
of the
Agbai,
speaker?
I'm going to have to hold you there.
So that's the problem.
Let's bring in Musa Hassan Gusau. Now, you are the Director, Literacy and Development, National Commission of Mass Education. You're smiling. Maybe you want to respond to some of the things the doctor said. But before you do, let me ask you this. Now, people say that Nigeria churns out year after year educated illiterates. What that means, I'm not sure. But by virtue of your position, how would you describe the turnout of graduates from Nigerian universities as far as being learned is concerned?
Well, let me appreciate the contribution of my co-speakers. In this regard, we need to cast a balance between our intention and what is operational on ground. We are not doubting our strengths as a country in terms of educational planning, assessment, and what have you. But the serious issue that we wanted to agree with the fact that the process of assessment, which also bring in the issue of making comments of educated illiterates. We are talking of the quality of education, the instrument through which an individual was passed through the curriculum content which was designed for a particular course in the university. The outcome is what determines such kind of statement. For instance, I could recall in one of the Eco Bank in Kaduna State, I happened to meet an NYC who seek for my advice to write an application for him to open an account in the bank because it's part of the mandatory issues. I look at him with his JC, NYSC, and I look at the fact that he passed through a 3-year program. He cannot pencil down an application to open an account. This justifies the educated illiterate, which also symbolize the kind of process and quality of instruction such individuals receive. It's not only that aspect that we're supposed to look at. The input in terms of teacher factor is one area that is questionable. You see people passing through a process of NCE program, graduating for a particular period of time, but they cannot master the subject matter in terms of their quality and expression. And they are the same people we use as teachers to train our children in primary school, secondary school. Then such process, if one should assess, will lead us to the present statement that was made outside the country, that the quality is not worthy of mention and other aspect of it. Then there are other criteria that was supposed to be placed by NUC to establish university, polytechnic, and what have you. But the current system, where politics form a basis for which such location in his hometown or local government determine the establishment of such polytechnic or university, is what is causing the whole jamboree, if you like, political jingoism in the country. It is not worthy to mention that the appointment of lecturers to bid in various departments is the responsibility of NUC to check the criteria that was put in place to recruit and promote staff or merit. Then something is wrong if the university cannot regulate such process. Recently in University of Abuja, we have seen students of medicine being asked to relocate to other universities because such courses are not being accredited.
Yes.
One should start asking, why over time, 3 years, 4 years,
8 years,
8 years, they have not been accredited, and yet admission was provided. In this regard, whose fault? These are issues that both the government, the assembly people are supposed to look at. And we are wasting our talent and wasting the time of these young people in the country. And that's what brings in the level of what Omelo has said in 2008, generating vulnerability in our society. Because we are producing half-baked students that will come out to stand as leaders or future leaders. And they are the same people we are going to recruit in the office. Then what kind of office practice do we expect? Half-baked learners, half-baked students or graduate? Then the outcome will be a dismissal of the fact that we are running to Gallo. And that is one of the preponderance of the educational system that is going on. Then we are more concerned with the fact that today we are only counting of structural and numerical advantages, our achievement. We are only expanding the structures, not minding the quality and the materials requirement to train one individual in a particular course. And these are issues that are supposed to be looked at by NUC before they went out and start making noise on issues that are internal. These are internal issues that we don't need to allow the Western countries to know. Because I know in 1804, when Industrial Revolution took place in Britain, they formed a solid foundation for the take-off of industries. And that's why Walter Rodney in his book, they said how Europe underdeveloped Africa. Because we have abundant raw materials that are required to promote their industries in Europe at that time. And they use adults to prepare their mind for the industrial process. But today, when you look at the whole process now, Africa developed under developing countries, we are transformed as mere consumers.
All right, okay.
And that's our issues.
Let me bring in the Honorable here. Now, it's enough. We cannot throw the baby out of the bathwater. And we've had all the challenges, and we see what's happening. Even in Europe, the perception about Nigeria, recently, I think yesterday in some of the newspapers say the perception about Nigeria is rather not encouraging. And that it is about time Nigeria begins to give the right impression in diaspora. If not, investors will not be encouraged to come here to invest. Now let's look at the education sector. We saw earlier on in the People's Parliament, we asked, one of the parliamentarians said, not anywhere in the UK or in America or even in Cuba will you ask someone to come and study here and they will jump at it. In fact, they will tell you there is nothing like education that works here in Nigeria because the certificates and nothing to write home about, even in our own country. So let's look at, the quality of teachers that we have, the quality of lecturers that we have, because those are the people that train the students, and the sort of people who train the students, when the students come and cannot fill applications in banks, even after having done their youth corps service, you look at their training. Let's look at the trainers, the teachers, the lecturers.
Thank you very much. That's why from the onset I said it was too sweeping for anybody to locate and localize the blames on governors. That so many people, so many sections of the society are involved. Few months back, the ASU threatened to go on strike because they were demanding that the retirement age of lecturers be extended to 70. And their argument was that if you retire, say, professors at 65, that is difficult these days to get professors. And on the floor, I said, that presentation by them alone is a confession of their own failure. Because it is the university system or the educational system that generates the professors. The worst thing that will happen to a man, I said, is the man approaching his death without having a successor. It is failure of leadership. The problem we have in the education sector, the greater part of it lies within the operators of the system itself. I was showing somebody last week, a graduate, a lady graduate, wrote me 4 text messages at 4 different times. And in each of those text messages, she said, sir, S-I-R-O-E.
Yes.
A 3-letter word.
Sir.
A graduate cannot spell it. 4 different messages spread over at least a month.
Perhaps it could be a mistake.
The same mistake.
S-I-R-O-E. So just to confirm what he has said, whom do you blame? Look into our educational system today, our schools. I attended Imo State University, Okigwe, the mother of Abia State University Uturu and Imo State University Owerri. We studied under cashew tree. When we went to the law school, the first set, we excelled and beat students from the federal universities that had all the facilities. Because in the first instance, for us, we knew where we were in that desert area. Today, students no longer study. Everything is commercialized. Lecturers collect money, others collect money, others collect other things, others collect both money and other things to award scores. And you have somebody who cannot make a single sentence come out with 2-1. The ladies come out with 2-1. Some will be very close to having a first class. Do you blame the governors for that?
All right, Honorable.
Now, you look at the instance he cited about the NUC, which is a regulatory body. You know, recently I investigated a matter on the NUC, the issue of the abrupt suspension of licenses of 6 universities and the revocation of 1. And my holding, which was the holding of the House in that case, was that NUC does not have the power to revoke the licenses under the law we have. And I feel that is not right. That is the position of the law. But that law is not right. Kind of right. It should have that right. But my duty is to look at the position of the law and see whether what they did was right. Then looking at the circumstances too, even if they had a right, it was abused. Because the situations that will culminate in the suspension of a license or revocation of a license is not a one-day situation. It's something that would have built up over time.
Yes.
Now you look at it every day, you turn on your television, on your network news, you hear a Federal Executive Council granted licenses for the establishment of universities. And you go to those areas, I've seen quite a number. You have a building of few rooms, and you wonder what informed that approval. What do they have on ground that justified the granting of license?
License, okay.
So, whom do you blame in that circumstance?
Okay, Honorable.
Now, if you talk about, please, sorry. If you talk about
we don't have a lot of time, sir.
Yes, yes. Now, the federal universities, we talk about the interventions and intrusions in the state universities. Would you also blame them for the same situation occurring in our federal universities, in our colleges of education, in our polytechnics? So what I'm saying, in essence, is that everybody in the educational sector, everybody has a role. It's not to the extent that my colleague, stretched this Kogi matter, because it will not be right to say, look, yes, what the governor did, or sorry, what they did in Kogi State, by using 12 to sack 13, honestly, it's an absurdity. But you cannot say, look, it's the money they should have put in education that they put there. And you cannot also blame the governor in that situation.
Why?
Okay.
So why you cannot blame the governor is because the members of the House of Assembly are given power under the Constitution to decide and determine who their leadership is. If they decide not to use that power, as you know, in the National Assembly, when we were about to inaugurate it, the party told us whom they wanted us to elect. Other forces told us whom they wanted us to elect. But on our own, we went in there and elected because we know that the Constitution has given us that power.
Okay,
so we
I'm going
cannot continue to blame the governors on
point.
everything that happens to us in this country.
All right, we've got to stop you at this point. Now, Dr. Agbai, before we go, I still want to focus on state universities in the domain of state governors.
Yes.
Now, we've seen state governors. We all know that what education needs more than anything is funding, and UNESCO has recommended that 26% of every budget of every country should be allocated to education. Honorable did say earlier that he doesn't see that being possible, but needless to say, education needs funding at all levels. Now you have state governors establishing new universities in whatever locality they deem fit, maybe in their hometown or their mother's hometown or their grandfather's hometown. They establish these universities and they are barely able to fund these universities. Now, in that kind of situation, who is to blame?
Where the universities are located is irrelevant. The most important thing is how it is being funded. If we also talk about the failures of education, we need to look at the change in focus. Nigerian universities must focus now on skill acquisition. Today, we are graduating unemployable graduates. Okay? Nigerian university certificates are not respected beyond here. So at the state level, I'm in total agreement that when you talk about university, you have the federal universities, you have private, but today we are talking about states, and that is why the emphasis is on governor. It's not because we are picking on them.
No, it's because
so by the time we talk about federal, we also talk about who should be responsible. There must be a change of focus. First, when you talk about professors collecting money, ask yourself why. It is not because they are not paid. The welfare must be reviewed. When you talk about handouts, why are the students using handouts in exchange? You look at that. So the point I'm trying to make is that the governors, because of the power of the governor, he has the power to make sure that he changes his focus. Today, the emphasis is not so where it should be. Instead of investing hugely in education, and that's why I kept saying that, there is an unnecessary investment in other areas. If the level of energy they use in making sure that they have the local government caretaker people of their choice, they have the speaker of their choice, they have this of their choice, if the same energy is placed in education, that is my point. We will have a situation where there will be graduates that are qualified because the right teachers are teaching. And who are the graduates? The graduates are the people who will come back to teach tomorrow. Right. So if you do not invest in these people, tomorrow they will go back to teach, and you cannot teach somebody who does not have intellectual capacity to do so. And that is why I believe the beginning and the end are the governors, because of the enormous power, unfortunately, that they hold today. That does not augur well for the development of our democracy.
All right. We've got to go. We're being asked to round up, but before we do, let's hear your parting words. What do you think about this?
Well, I think the most important aspect that we need to stress is the fact that if we enroll students in universities, we need to make sure that all the facilities required to make sure that the curriculum content is interpreted according to the standard.
Okay.
Is emphasized. Recruiting better teachers for our policy to implement us is a better way out. And we should minimize politics, because we cannot compromise quality with politics. And that is the message we wanted to pass.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. If you've just joined us, we've been taking a look at the rot in Nigeria's education. In Nigeria, universities are governors, the culprits. That has been our topic for discussion. And to discuss this, we've had joining us Dr. Eke Agbai, Vice President, Center for Policy and Foreign Engagement, USA. Dr. Agbai, it was nice to have you.
Thank you.
We also had joining us Musa Hassan Gusau, Director, Literacy and Development, National Commission for Mass Education, NMEC. It was a pleasure having you as well.
Thank you.
All right, our dear Honorable Uzo Azubike, Member House of Representatives, thank you so much for finding time to join us, and thank you for all your inputs.
Thank you very much.